Good morning. Thank you all for taking the time today to come and join us at the formal launch of the new Code of Practice, PAS 2000, Bringing Safe Construction Products to Market, which published at the end of February. I think we have a few things to note before we begin. In case of an emergency, there are some staff members here that will help you head to the nearest exit if that's something that does need to happen. I don't believe there's a drill planned, so it would be a case of it being a real emergency if it happened. You go down to the ground level and out into the nearest exit, into the street. There's 2 exits you may have seen when we came in, one either side. You've probably all spotted that there is Wi-Fi and joined it if you wish. The username is there, but there's no password required, so please just access that. You saw the QR codes that were up on the previous slide as well, hopefully. We have BSI's customer relations team here to support us today. Julia's at the back of the room waving there. Thank you, Julia. And also Cara from the committee side. If you did have any questions about membership or our committees and wanted to get more involved with that, then please do speak to my colleagues there. And again, there's toilets here on the right if you haven't found them already. And for security reasons, please wear your badge at all times. I did well reading that over there. It's not very... So before Jeff, we have an excellent lineup of speakers here today who I will hand over to shortly. But before we get into the main part of the event, there's just a few things I'd like to say in relation to PAS 2000. This was an idea that goes back to 2024 in terms of potentially BSI developing a standard for bringing safe construction products to market. But before even that, as part of the Morrell Day Testing for a Safer Future report, published in April 2023, there was reference made to a general safety requirement for construction products. In fact, recommendation 3.3 stated, government and industry to explore the practicality of developing standards and guidance which support the general safety requirements. Paul Morrell was instrumental in bringing this idea forward, and so discussions began with Paul, OPSS, Peter Capelhorn from the Construction Products Association, Ant Bird from BSI, and Dr. Hal Davis, Head of Technical Insight at CABE. Paul stressed the need for a document that would describe what good looked like when it came to bringing construction products to market and what type of things the standard could potentially cover. The government, through the National Construction Products Regulator, OPSS, were then supportive by agreeing to sponsor the development of the PAS, and Hal ultimately ended up being the technical author. The steering group, made up of experts from across the industry, some of which are here today, then spent a large part of 2025 developing the standard. Thankfully, BSI also allocated Beverly Goodchild, who is here today as well, as the project manager for PAS 2000. The incredible work that Bev did to manage the group not only resulted in us producing a document that was of the highest quality under difficult circumstances given the complexity and emotive nature of the topic, but also completed the task in a shorter time frame than was originally forecast. My thanks go to Bev and, of course, all the steering group members. Finally, to Hal Davis, OBE, again, my thanks to you. Hal tirelessly worked throughout the life of this project, producing a first draft for the steering group to begin to assess and develop. Dealt with hundreds of comments received following the draft for public comment phase, right up until the last minute, getting technical and editorial changes to deal with, all of which were dealt with calmly and professionally. It's been no mean feat, and BSI thanks you for all the work you have done. That's all I wanted to say ahead of the keynote speakers. First of all, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Brown from OPSS, again, from without whom this standard would simply not have existed. I reiterate our thanks to Jeff and OPSS for sponsoring the development of PAS 2000, and also led to it being made available free to download. It will make a big difference in terms of how many organisations will pick up the PAS and begin to benefit from it. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks very much indeed, Ian, and thank you for your kind words. And I'd like to start really too by thanking BSI, not just for bringing this project to fruition, but for convening what was a wide and, come on, let's be real, sometimes challenging conversations within the steering group, all of whom played a fantastic part in getting us to where we are today. So, why did the OPSS, the Office for Product Safety and Standards, sponsor PAS 2000? Well, we did it because we saw persistent structural problems in the industry. Now, despite an existent regulatory framework, one that's not perfect, but one that nevertheless is there and is to be complied with, and despite the clear lessons to be learned from the utter horrors of Grenfell Tower, compliance with construction product safety requirements, from our experience as the regulator, is all too often inconsistent or fragmented or quite simply absent. We see this repeatedly through our inspections, our wider market surveillance activity, and through our investigations. I'll go a little deeper on that. We regularly encounter products that are placed on the market with inadequate or poorly evidenced performance claims. Safety critical information that's not clear or incomplete or inconsistent across key documents. Failures to comply with factory production control processes and procedures, and businesses that are either unaware or uncertain about what they have to do to comply with the law. In some businesses, we see good intentions, but there is a lack generally of systematic approaches to product safety. These issues are entirely preventable. Quite frankly, it's simply not good enough. Now, the issue is not simply whether regulation exists. It does, of course, as we know. But broadening this out is whether industry itself has the tools, the structures, and the discipline to translate what they need to do into consistent, repeatable practice. Too often, current practice relies on individual expertise above organisational systems, informal judgments rather than documented, agreed processes, or just a general reliance that, we've always done it this way, never been a problem, we'll carry on doing it. That approach has never been sufficient, it certainly isn't now. And this is where PAS 2000 becomes essential. Now, OPSS sponsored it because industry needs a clear, practical route to producing a safe product and to demonstrating that they are producing a safe product. The PAS sets out clear principles for committing to product safety, to emphasising safety throughout product development, not just at the point of placing on the market, and requiring better control of product information and of evidence attesting to that information. It's deliberately structured to move industry towards planned, systematic control of risk. And in doing that, it will help businesses, many of whom, as we know in this sector, are small and medium-sized enterprises, to organise themselves to meet their buyers' expectations, but also society's expectations, and to prepare themselves for the refreshed and more vigorous and robust regulatory framework that is coming. It'll help businesses demonstrate due diligence in developing products and placing them on the market, and it will provide regulators and clients and users and residents with confidence that safety has been properly considered. Now, the direction of travel from the government is clear. There will be a new regulatory framework that businesses will have to adapt to. But the construction product sector is only now becoming accustomed to operating in a regulatory environment where the actions they've taken or have not taken may be challenged, and where changes to those actions are required where they will be enforced upon them. This will, of course, continue. And there is now no going back. No more tolerance of misleading claims. No more shoddy and inaccurate product information. No more diffusion of responsibility down the supply chain. Those days have gone. And some businesses, it has to be said, have responded really, really well to this. And they are to be congratulated. Others have been slower to adapt. PAS 2000 is a signal that the baseline has been raised, but it will only deliver the benefits if industry uses it properly. So that means industry needs to invest time and resource in understanding its expectations, to embed its principles into real business processes. And that may well include, obtaining independent assurance from participation in schemes such as the excellent Code for Construction Product Information, and moving away from minimalist or box-ticking approaches. Used seriously, PAS 2000 will help organisations understand and identify gaps before regulators do, improve the quality and reliability of product information, and demonstrates a level of maturity that is increasingly expected by both regulators and clients. The steering committee that worked on this document, very ably led by Beverly, as Ian has already said, were fantastic throughout, with a host of challenging and productive discussions. I'd like to thank Howell as well for his excellent work as technical author on this job. And we're very proud of that which has been produced. It's a challenge to industry, really. It's a challenge to move beyond informal practices, to treat product safety as a core organisational responsibility, and a challenge to demonstrate compliance clearly and consistently and credibly. We know that the status quo wasn't good enough. We believe that this PAS provides industry with a practical way to do it better. Thank you very much indeed.
This is the ultimate in Howell Davis needs no introduction. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by reiterating some of the thanks, particularly to Jeff and the OPSS for sponsoring, to the steering group for all their efforts. I'd also like to thank Bev for her work on the document. I think people often have cause to reflect that BSI documents don't come out as promptly as expected. Well, this one came out not just when expected, it came out a bit early, and that's in large measure down to Bev's efforts, so thank you. And above all, I'd like to thank Paul Morrell for having the idea and having the tenacity to persuade others that it was needed and helping to see it through. So thank you, Paul, and I'm glad you can be here for the launch today. Now, I think there might be one with me. Right, we don't need a picture of me, you can see me. Now, we do need to stop and reflect on why we are here. We're here because on that fateful day in June 2017, nearly 9 years ago, 72 souls were lost in that fire. And the public inquiry is very clear. Those deaths were all avoidable. That's why we're here. And so whenever people start to express disagreement with some of the building safety reforms, I feel we always need to start by asking, hang on a minute, why are we doing this? Because we can't ensure that that never happens again. If you say that, then dare I say you don't understand risk properly. we can do everything in our power to reduce the risk of that ever happening again. And that is what we are about here. And PAS 2000 is an attempt to contribute to that in the area of product safety. So by way of background, we had Dame Judith Hackett's report, which came out in 2018. Judith got it out within a year. And that made various recommendations that led to the Building Safety Act. And within the Building Safety Act, there were provisions for a new regulator for construction products, and the Office of Product Safety and Standards was given the role of running the National Construction Products Regulator. And within the Building Safety Act, there are significant new powers for the Secretary of State to regulate construction products. So that's the start of the journey that we're on. The inquiry, it was the winter of 2020 and January 2021. We were just emerging from lockdown, and the evidence that came before the inquiry around construction products was, I think it's fair to say, shocking. One manufacturer had to withdraw a certificate it had been issued with a number of years previously. Others either gave evidence of things that had been going on that shouldn't have been, or simply didn't attend to give evidence at all in one case. And as a result of that evidence, Paul and his co-author Annalise Day were given the task of carrying out an independent review of the construction products testing regime. Now, Paul has said on many occasions that the first thing they concluded was that there isn't a national construction products testing regime. There certainly wasn't then. I'm not convinced that we've got all the way to having one now, although our colleagues from MHCLG will address that after me. We had the inquiry report and we had its recommendations. And they came out 18 months ago now. And it is fair to say that some of these things have probably taken longer than they should, which is regrettable to say the least. Within the public inquiry report, there was a really blunt statement that a significant reason why Grenfell Tower came to be clad in combustible materials was systematic dishonesty on the part of those who made and sold the rain screen cladding panels and insulation products. That's in the report, chapter 2, paragraph 19. And unfortunately, we have to accept, based on the evidence that was presented to the inquiry, that that is what went on. And I don't think anybody is prepared to argue, well, it was only those three companies. Everybody else is fine. And if you do want to argue that, then keep that under your hat until we get to the end of the presentation, because I will provide some evidence to show that it is not just those three. And then in February 2025, government responded to the inquiry report. They also produced the green paper, about which there will be a little more in the next presentation. But I want to stress a couple of things. Government made it very clear that there is going to be a shift in approach and that manufacturers are going to have to take responsibility for what they produce. And I do just want to make the comment at this point. When I say manufacturer, I mean the organisation that places the product on the market. And if they do that by buying it from somebody else who runs a factory where it's made, and they then brand it, they are a manufacturer. And all the requirements of the construction product regulation apply to the manufacturer. I understand that's causing some either confusion or is the source of deliberate obfuscation, but we need to be very clear. Those who place it on the market with their label on it are the manufacturer. And although there have been reforms initiated, there is more to be done. And so this was a year ago with the Green Paper, tough new rules on construction product safety, backed by a strengthened regulator to stamp out bad practice and drive higher standards. We'll see a little bit more of how that is already working out, and we'll also hear about how it's going to go further. And then just a couple of weeks ago, the Construction Products Reform White Paper came out. You will get more detail on this as well from David and Katie shortly. But this shows that the direction in which government wants to move. Now, it's worth stressing that in the UK, we have a system of functional regulation. It is different in each of the 4 administrations. In Scotland, you have technical standards and technical handbooks rather than building regulations and approved documents. But the principle is the same. And so we have the law, which is what you've got to do. We have statutory guidance, approved documents, technical standards in Scotland. That's technical handbook in Scotland. We have guidance from regulators, which, because it's from regulators, carries a certain weight. We have national, European and international standards. And it's worth noting that if Europe adopts a standard, then BSI is expected to adopt it as well. And then we have industry guidance and standards, and there is a clear hierarchy. And the first question is, what's the law got to say? The second question is, what does the statutory guidance say? And it's worth reminding ourselves that in relation to products, we have Regulation 7, which deals with workmanship and materials. And so shoddy products probably don't meet Regulation 7. Is Regulation 7 guidance? Are we still awake? Is Regulation 7 guidance? No, it's the law. So it's worth remembering we have this functional system and it's supported by regulations, and they're the building regulations. It's also supported by the construction products regulations. We also have approved documents, and if anybody wasn't aware, we've now got up to T in the alphabet with part T for toilet. I'm not making it up. There's a Yes Minister episode in how we got T on that. And a failure to comply with a relevant approved document may be relied on as tending to establish liability, and proof of compliance may be relied on as tending to negative liability. In other words, you haven't done anything wrong. There is limited case law on this, but effectively, if you follow the approved documents, you're likely to be complying with the law. It's not a guarantee. If you don't follow them, you've got to demonstrate how you think you've complied with the law. And that will apply in relation to Reg 7 as to other things. So we have a system of functional regulation. The legal requirement is to demonstrate reasonable provision against the functional requirements in the building regs, technical standards in Scotland. And that means we can have a wide range of solutions. It allows for innovation, but it needs a higher level of competence to achieve compliance. It requires designers to make assessments of products before they specify them. And how can designers make a reasonable assessment of a product without accurate, reliable, up-to-date information from product manufacturers? And that might mean actually ringing the manufacturer up and asking them questions to which they need accurate, reliable answers. They might need test data. Now, worth remembering what the designer's duties are. These are in Part 2A of the building regs. And if anybody's missed the press release, these came into force in October 2023. This is not new. And this is what designers should be doing. And it's in the building regs. So is it guidance or is it law? This is law. Now, I don't think anybody's been prosecuted yet, but these are statutory duties. And if something goes wrong and they haven't been complied with, somebody's in the cart. Somebody could be an organisation, could be an individual. It will depend on the case. And there's more to come. Designers need to take all reasonable steps to ensure that the design is such that if the building work to which the design relates were built in accordance with that design, the building work would be in compliance with all relevant requirements. Now, how can you possibly do that without accurate, up-to-date information about the products you're using? I don't think it can be done. And that does raise the question of what is design and who's a designer. Well, there's the definition of design work. It's in the regulations, so that's what the law says. It's not something I've made up. And there's designer. Any person, contractor, or other person referred to in Part 2A of these regulations who in the course of a business carries out any design work or arranges for somebody else to do it. Oh, it's for you. And these are legal requirements, they're not guidance. So this is already in place, and this is the backdrop to PAS 2000. So where do manufacturers and products and PAS 2000 fit in? Well, designers need to specify products, that's fairly obvious. They need to specify products that are safe and compliant with building regs. And designers need clear, accurate, accessible, up-to-date, unambiguous information about products. And I haven't put all of those words in just because I wanted to fill the line. There is something about each one of them that is important. It needs to be clear. It's no use if it takes 7 pages to describe something that could be done in 7 lines. It needs to be accessible. Can you find it regularly? It's 3 links down a website isn't probably accessible. Oh, sorry, we've updated the product. That's a bit out of date. Well, that's no good, is it? And it needs to be unambiguous. I hate to go back to it, but some of the discussions that went on at the inquiry about the meaning of certain words, all because they were not unambiguous. And so manufacturers, or if the product is imported, their agent, need to supply the information. Now, I don't think there's anything outrageous in any of that. And that's the backdrop to PAS 2000, bringing safe products to market, code of practice. Now, I don't think anybody for a moment is going to question the idea that manufacturers should take ownership of the products they put on market and of being able to say, this product is safe to be used for these things. And I'm going to stick my neck out. If a manufacturer can't say, this product is safe for these uses, perhaps they ought to stop the production line and sort it out before they carry on selling. And if they really don't know how to do it, perhaps they better go and find something else to do. So, I hope everybody's got a copy and you've seen that. What does it cover? What's in it? Well, as Jeff has already said, it's setting out what are the reasonable expectations of manufacturers. If you said to a manufacturer, can you demonstrate why you think this product that you're shipping out of your factory is safe to use for the things you say it can be used for? What is the evidence? If Jeff or one of his colleagues turns up and asks you that question, can you give them a story that will assure them that you know what you're doing, that you know what you're producing, you know how it will perform, and you've got all the evidence to back it, and you provide all the information that a user can reasonably need? That's the ambition. And in a sense, the next few slides merely elaborate on that. So it's a framework against which you do that. And the key thing is it's reasonable steps. And as has already been indicated, there is clear direction in the white paper, and we'll hear more in a minute, that will strengthen the requirements. Now, the PAS is a voluntary document. Nobody has to do it. If you can meet the requirements that are brought in other ways, you're very free to do that. My suggestion is that given the amount of work and effort that's gone into it, it might be a jolly good starting point for anybody who hasn't put all that work and effort in. And my suspicion is that if the OPSS turn up and you say, oh, no, we haven't bothered with that PAS 2000 thing, we've done our own job, they might decide, oh, this visit might take a bit longer than we thought. They might ask a few more questions. So it's voluntary, but we think it is a very good framework to use. And this is going to apply to products placed on the market by either manufacturers, my earlier comment about those who own label included, or any other economic operator who is placing something on the market. And the ambition here is to provide a framework for meeting expectations. And it's not just expectations of government, it's not just expectations of the OPSS, it's actually expectations of the public who have seen what happened at Grenfell and are aware of the ongoing problems and I don't think are much impressed. So, the PAS is based on PAS 7050, which is for consumer goods. I say based on, in principle. There are lots of differences with construction products, and that's fully recognised. And so there are a lot of things that have needed to be altered or added. The PAS is there to enable that you've thought about the safety of your product throughout the development process. This isn't something to think about at the last minute when the brochures are about to go to the printer. This is something to think about. We think that there's a need for a product that does this. We think we could produce it. Great. How can we produce it so it's safe and it works? And this will help. And you may want to consider using a formal technical approval process. And it also allows for certification to be used. PAS 2000 does not say anybody has to have anything certified. That is not the way that BSI works. However, given the challenges that we've seen in the sector and levels of trust, would you rather accept information that has gone through a good third-party scheme and has got somebody saying, yes, what they are claiming has been checked and assessed, and we say it's true? Or somebody who says, yeah, we've done PAS 2000, Scouts Honour, other youth schemes are available. I know which one I have more trust in, and I'm pretty confident that I know which one the regulator will have more trust in, and I'm pretty confident I know what the average person in the street would have more trust in, and frankly would expect. So that's worth bearing in mind. So, it's due diligence around product safety, and that's the first line of the scope. And these recommendations can be applied to products on the market. Now, if you've got a product on the market and there are some statutory duties, you've actually got to think about those statutory duties. We're not saying, well, anything that was already on the market, we won't worry about whether that's safe. Obviously, applying it to something you already make is slightly different, but the principles apply. So it covers how we assess the risks around a proposed construction product before we place it on the market. What are the things it's likely to be exposed to? Structural loads, fire, how does it respond if you get it damp? Does it need to have an acoustic performance because it's used to separate two rooms where you don't want the sound to travel? Does it have to have energy performance requirements? All of those things need to be considered, and a few more, and they're detailed in the document. But it goes on to look at how you then assess it. So, okay, it's got to have a certain fire performance. What tests are we going to use? Can we do those tests in-house? Do we need to get somebody else to do those tests? Would it be a good idea to have those tests done somewhere else and have third-party certification? It's got to have a certain acoustic performance. Well, can we test that in-house? Do we get somebody to do it for us? All of those things need thinking through. What evidence are we going to need to show this product is safe? Need to think about factory production control processes. How do we make sure that what we're producing is consistent and is consistently compliant? You can have an ISO 9001 system and produce consistently non-compliant stuff if you don't apply it properly. You can see several manufacturers nodding their heads. And also, how do you provide construction product information? It's really important. How do designers know what the product does if you don't give them clear, accessible, comprehensive information about the product? And then there's this really radical suggestion that perhaps instead of just selling it and running, you find out how your product works in the market. You keep getting people ringing up because the product isn't working properly. Do you go to site and have a look? And why isn't it? Oh, it keeps being installed the wrong way round. What could we do to make that less of an issue? You know, think of all the, I should have had my little adapter, you know, all the little things we have, USB-C, USB-B, all the other things, they're all shaped in such a way you can't plug them in the wrong way round. You know, how many construction products could be, it might be an almost zero cost modification to so what are you doing to get out there, find out how do people cock it up with my product and what can I do to reduce the cock-ups? And if it's a serious cock-up, how many people might have cocked it up without realising and now there's a safety issue and what am I going to do about it? And might there be some requirements around product recalls? And it's not, the PAS does not cover a process for undertaking third-party assurance and certification, although I'm going to say a couple of things about that in a minute. So it should be of use to manufacturers, importers, distributors, other economic operators, and it will also be relevant to the conformity assessment bodies, testing and inspection, designers, contractors. It's likely to be useful to a lot of people. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of the more thoughtful designers start asking questions of manufacturers. What are you doing in relation to PAS 2000? How are you assessing your products to make sure they're safe? Now, one thing I haven't mentioned, and I'll head off a question, some people in the comments thought that this was only for non-CE marked products. Now, the legal position around CE marking is slightly different, but in principle, this can be used on any product at all. If it's a product that's made to a designated standard, the designated standard does a lot of your homework for you. It tells you what the critical performance requirements are. It tells you what some of the test regimes are. It tells you what form of factory production control you need. It will specify some of the information you have to provide. But the fact that there is a standard that does all of those things does not necessarily mean your product is safe, especially if you don't do it properly. And I'll come back to that in a few minutes. So it can be used for any product, and it should help anybody developing a product, whether CE marked or not. And we'll hear a bit more about what's happening for the other products from David and Katie in a minute. And yeah, there's a little bit more about the term manufacturer, and I've mentioned that already. So the PAS gives us 5 key elements. What do I do to make sure, what do I do to assess the requirements that my product's got to meet? How do I have reliable, credible testing and certification? What factory production control do I need? And again, this needs to be proportionate. Do you need the same level of factory production control if you're producing decorative paint for domestic applications as you do if you're producing steel that goes into a steel structure on a 30-storey building? Accurate and trustworthy product information. I think I've said enough on that. And finally, processes for feedback and for dealing with problems and for product improvement based on what you learn when you find that things aren't going quite as you planned. No plan survives contact with the enemy. No product installation instructions will survive contact with the contracting business, dare I suggest. And I'm not having a go at contractors. You know, if you're contracting, you've got a different set of demands to somebody working on product development. We need to bring those two things together. So the PAS gives us what reasonable skill and care looks like for manufacturers. Now, some closing thoughts. I want to say a word about the Code for Construction Product Information because I understand the PAS has only been out for 10 days. And already I understand people are saying, oh, well, now we've got PAS 2000, we don't need the Code for Construction Product Information. Can I respond to that with one very simple word? Nonsense. Well, it is. It's complete and utter nonsense. You've all listened to what I've said. I've explained how the PAS provides a framework for manufacturers to assess their products. It doesn't say anything about third parties assessing how that has been done and whether it's been done reliably or credibly. And that is the role of the Code for Construction Product Information. So if anybody is half tempted to think, oh, we can do PAS 2000 and we can self-certify, yes, legally you can, but do you think anybody's going to believe you? And if you do, wait for a couple of slides and I'll debunk that finally. Back to the quote. We have to recognise that we work in an industry that doesn't have high levels of trust at the moment because of what happened at Grenfell. And if I'm honest, it's not doing a huge amount to improve that right now. So the Code for Construction Product Information is there to provide manufacturers with a way to have an independent third party come in and assess everything to do with their product information, how they develop products, how they develop the information, how they manage information, how they provide information, how they train staff to give information, so that when somebody picks up the phone with a technical inquiry, if it's something that they can't answer, they do the right thing and they pass it on to someone who can, and they don't wing it. That's all CCPI. And government was clear in the Green Paper that CCPI was there. It's welcomed. It was welcomed a year ago. And they see the need for industry to significantly increase the uptake of initiatives such as this code. Now, do we find in the white paper that government has said, now that PAS 2000 has come out, you can forget about CCPI? Anybody think it's no? We welcome industry-led schemes such as the Code for Construction Product Information and its work to drive up standards. So that's the direction government is taking. They do refer to the PAS positively in the white paper. I haven't put a slide in for it, but they do. It's not either or, it's both and. So I hope that's clear. Now, one other thought, digital product passports. Now, before anybody tells me, I am aware that the UK has left the EU. I did spot it. But this is a European Commission thing, and these are going to go into European standards. Yeah, that's right. European standards are adopted by BSI as British and European standards. And European standards underpin CE marking. And we are continuing to recognise CE marking in Great Britain. And yes, I deliberately said Great Britain, not UK, because Great Britain doesn't include Northern Ireland, and in Northern Ireland they have to do it under the Windsor Agreement. I'm not going to go into any more complexity over that. I might get it wrong. We're going to get digital product passports as part of CE marking. So any manufacturer who makes a product that is CE marked, this is coming to you. The timescale is not entirely clear yet. It will come when the standardisation request for the product that covers your product is to be updated, and the harmonised or designated standard will be updated, and at that point the digital product passport will come in. The EU is looking to get the first ones coming in as early as next year for some products. Not construction products, I don't think, but they are starting to talk about the construction products as well. So this is coming, and if you're making CE marked products, it's coming to a factory near you on an indeterminate timeline. Finally, effective enforcement, and I will apologise to Paul for plagiarising his slide, but it's so good and I can't think of a better one. Which one of those is most likely to induce the right behaviour in you? I'm going to finish with this one, which was only published last week, and it's the OPSS report into its inspections of heat-soaked thermally toughened glass. If anybody is in need of a depressing read, I can't recommend this highly enough. That's actually a very sorry state of affairs. Here we are. When this investigation started in 2024, we were 7 years on from Grenfell. And the statistics are truly shocking. I think I'm right in saying that no manufacturer visited could produce a compliant declaration of performance on first visit. Let me say that again. No manufacturer could produce a compliant DOP on first visit. Now, all seriousness, I go back to my comments about trust, about third-party assurance. In an industry where levels of compliance with the law, this is a CE marked product. There's a British and European standard for it. It's designated. That standard is a requirement under construction product regulations. 0% doing declarations of performance properly. 0% providing the right information to designers who have a statutory duty to design safe buildings. If anybody thinks that any right-minded observer of this industry is going to take it on trust with figures like that, may I suggest it's time to think again. And it's time for us to pick up PAS 2000 and look hard at how we assess our products and how we rebuild trust that what we put on the market is safe for the purposes for which it's intended. Thank you very much for listening, and I will hand over to Ian.
Thank you, Hal. You've taken a moment to digest Hal's presentation before we go into MHCLG. So I think if you registered for this event early, you may not have spotted that MHCLG were going to speak. So I think the fact that the white paper is now out, we very much appreciate that David and Katie are taking the time to come today and speak about the white paper, which again, we're talking about a lot of information, and you've been very supportive of PAS 2000 as well. We recognise that through government, and that's mentioned in the white paper too. So I think, Katie, you are going to go first. We're not doing intros and bios today, so that way we can cut to the chase a little bit. But Katie, if you could cover first, and then I think you're going to, great stuff. Really appreciate it. Over to you, Katie. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. It's really nice to be here. We're really delighted to be at the launch of PAS 2000 today. It's such an important resource to help industry place safe products on the market and also to prepare for the reforms that we're about to talk about. I'm not going to dwell on this slide because Hal has been through the kind of journey we've been on so eloquently. But I will just say that kind of the terrible events at Grenfell and the kind of exposure of the building safety crisis kick-started a programme of work which led to the Green Paper in February 2025 and culminated recently in our White Paper, which was published a couple of weeks ago. Just thought it might be helpful to give a quick recap of the objectives we set out in the Green Paper last year. So our first priority has got to be safety, safe products, safely used. Secondly, one of our key objectives is around accountability. So this is about being really clear where accountability sits across the supply chain so that all manufacturers and economic operators act responsibly in line with their duties. As Hal just made clear, we think it's really important that any system is backed by strong enforcement to hold actors to account. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And then finally, we need to make sure that our reforms support growth and innovation in the sector. And we're going to do that through clarity and proportionality. Finally, I would note that 3 of the Grenfell recommendations relate directly to construction product regulation. So we'll cover those as we talk more about our proposals. We've taken some action in recent years. Some of the key reforms that have happened so far is obviously the Building Safety Act, which established National Construction Product Regulator in OPSS and the Building Safety Regulator. We've banned combustible cladding from high-rise buildings. But I think that a lot of these concerns remain. I'm not going to go through all of the sort of criticisms that both Grenfell Inquiry and the Hackett and Morrell Day review exposed, but I'll kind of touch on a few of them. So the lack of transparency in the testing and certification regime, the potential conflicts of interest, which mean that conformity assessment bodies may not act in the public interest. Obviously, we've only got partial coverage of the regulatory regime at the moment. Our most recent kind of central estimate suggests that only 37% of products are covered by a designated standard, which means that a large proportion of products simply aren't regulated. And even if they're found to be unsafe, the national regulator doesn't have any powers to act and remove them from the market. And the fact that so much is dependent on selecting the right product for the right use. Is that product supported by the right product information, and is it installed correctly by a competent person? We need to do more to make sure that that happens. In summary, the range of issues identified mean that a system-wide approach to reform is needed. I'm going to hand over to David for the next bit.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. So moving on now to sort of where we are today. As has been mentioned, the Construction Products Reform White Paper was published a couple of weeks ago. Feels like quite a long time ago now, but it is only a few weeks. And that was published alongside the annual report by the government in response to the Grenfell Inquiry report as well, setting out our action in relation to the various recommendations there. And as we'll go through in more detail, sort of at headline level, the white paper sets out the proposals for system-wide reform. Should also note that alongside publication of the white paper, we also published a more detailed consultation document on the general safety requirement, which we'll talk more about and has been mentioned, but that is the route to ensure that all products are within scope of the regulatory framework going forward. And the period of consultation on both the white paper and the general safety requirement is 3 months and runs to the 20th of May. So it's all available on gov.uk, so please do review. And there's a number of questions there where we're seeking people's views. So moving on now to the white paper itself. There's a lot of information in it. We've obviously got limited time today, so if you haven't already, do have a full read of it yourself. It's on gov.uk, but we'll try to sort of set out today the main headline areas from that. So firstly, before we get into the detail of what we are setting out that the government will take forward through the white paper, it's worth recapping what we're seeking to do here, why we're doing this work. So Hal and Katie have mentioned the past events that have led to the need for system-wide reform. At the top there are the principal objectives that we are seeking to achieve through the work that we are taking forward. And this is about making sure that products are safe, that our reforms support growth and innovation, and that there is clear accountability and responsibility at each stage through the journey of a product. So taking those overall headline objectives through the Green Paper and now through the White Paper, we've sought to design our reform through what we set out there as 4 foundational pillars. And these are strengthening the regulatory requirements on products, strengthening the oversight of conformity assessment, strengthening the information requirements linked to digitisation and supporting traceability of products, and strengthening the role and powers of the regulator to help drive enforcement. Those 4 main pillars are covered in chapters 6 to 9 of the white paper, and there's much more detail there, but we'll now go through the headlines of each of those. So this slide covers some of the main elements that are set out in chapter 6 of the white paper. The slides will be shared afterwards, and as I say, there's a lot more information in the white paper itself, so do have a look. But we'll spend a little bit of time just going through what's there, because these are the key proposals in relation to the requirements for products. So firstly, on the left-hand side, as set out in the Green Paper and then confirmed in the White Paper, we'll be taking forward a dual approach. The first part of it is that where products are covered by a designated standard, so those are the products that will be required to be affixed with a UK CA mark or a CE mark, it will remain the case that it will be mandatory to declare the performance of your product in line with that standard. And we will reform the current regulatory framework that governs that to strengthen that in terms of product information, various other requirements that are set out in the white paper, and we will do that in a way that where it meets our objectives is consistent with the new EU construction products regulation that was published in the latter part of 2024. And the last point there of point 1 on that part of the slide confirms that for new standards that come forward, so a lot of those are generated through Europe, as has been touched on by Hal, consideration of designation of those, i.e. making them mandatory in Great Britain, will be made on a case-by-case basis. So we would expect consistency for a variety of reasons, including trade, and because we think that the new EU CPR is considerably strengthened and supports a number of our objectives. But a standard will only become mandatory in Great Britain if it is designated as such by the Secretary of State going forward. So that covers the new arrangements for those products which are currently within scope of the regulatory framework. Then, alongside that, for all other construction products, we will be introducing a risk-based general safety requirement. And Katie will talk more about that in a moment on the next slide, but this is about making sure that those products are safe for their intended and normal or foreseeable conditions of use. And the main aim there, in terms of what's on the left-hand side of the slide, is making sure that all construction products will be subject to one of those 2 sets of requirements when being placed on the market, but not both. And one point I probably should mention as well, Hal touched on the link between designated standards and safety. I think it's probably worth highlighting at this point that in relation to those products regulated under the construction products regulations, so those that have a UK CA or CE marking, it is the case at the moment and will remain the case that even where a product is compliant with those requirements, if it is considered by the regulator to be unsafe, the regulator can take action to address those risks. So it's probably just worth highlighting that at this point. So then, in terms of what are the voluntary routes to bringing products to market, so every product will be covered by one of the 2 points on the left-hand side. There are a number of reasons why a manufacturer might wish to seek specific additional assurance through technical assessments or third-party certification schemes. And we think that those voluntary routes have an important role to play. But we do think, starting with third-party certification schemes, the Grenfell Inquiry highlighted a number of issues with some schemes that were in place and discussed in the report. And so we think there is a need to ensure that those schemes are within scope of the regulatory oversight, so the regulator can take action if needed. And importantly, whilst we think the third-party certification schemes have a really important role to play, we think it's really important that the level of assurance that different schemes provide is clear to those, the clients of those schemes and also those using the outputs from them. So manufacturers choosing which scheme they might want to use, and for designers and specifiers who might have a certificate under one of these schemes, we think it's important that it's really clear what that level of assurance is and is not. So alongside a requirement for the regulator to approve the use of those schemes, we will also set a minimum, some minimum transparency requirements. So this is not about saying every third-party scheme must include X, Y, and Z levels of assurance, but it is about saying you must be clear what your scheme does and doesn't include, and that should be easily accessible. Then in terms of the technical assessment process, so this is the voluntary route to UKCA or CE marking. So I think we fully recognise that since the UK left the EU, the technical assessment process hasn't functioned as well as it might in terms of how it works in Great Britain. So what we want to do is retain that scheme, because that route to market, because we think it has an important role to play, particularly to support innovative products coming to market, but that it's improved to make it easier for manufacturers and technical assessment bodies to utilise that route to market. And there's a number of provisions set out in the white paper that set out how we would do that. So everything I've just touched on there is all about the steps leading up to placing the product on the market. However, as we set out in the green paper and then in more detail in the white paper, it's how products are then selected and installed is critical. The steps I've just talked about could be done, in a textbook way, but if, as Hal was saying, a product is installed upside down or the wrong way round, that's where significant problems can occur. So we will be taking forward some specific measures to look at helping to make sure that products are selected appropriately and installed appropriately and safely alongside the measures I've just talked about in terms of placing products on the market. So specifically, we will review Regulation 7.1 of the Building Regulations 2010 and approved Document 7, which both of those relate to, so the Building Regulations, going back to Hal's analogy, is the law. The approved document is the statutory guidance, and they relate to materials and workmanship. but we saw through the consultation that the effectiveness of those needs further scrutiny, and so we'll be reviewing those and considering what action may be appropriate. Regulation 7 applies in relation to all products, but in addition to that, we intend to give the regulator power to set enhanced measures in relation to selection and installation where a product's end use is critical to safe construction. So this is an evolved position in relation to what was in the Building Safety Act as a category of products that are critical to safe construction. We think that it's appropriate to focus any additional measures in relation to the end-use application of that product rather than placing on the market specifically. In looking at that and in looking at both of those areas, we're very conscious, again, as Hal set out in his overview of some of the requirements in Part 2A, there are a number of measures that have come in recent years, and we're very conscious of the need to avoid the risk of duplication or confusion. But in taking forward the review of Reg 7 and looking at what's needed for those particularly critical uses of a product, we think there's a need to do more there as well. But I'll now hand back to Katie, who's going to talk in a bit more detail about the general safety requirement.
So as David touched upon, a key element of the new regime, and in fact one of the first reforms we intend to bring forward, is the introduction of a general safety requirement. So this will cover any construction product that's not already covered by a designated standard, and means that manufacturers will need to assess any risks presented by their product to bring a safe product to market. They'll have to do their best to eliminate or mitigate any risks before that product can be placed on the market. Products will need to be supported by comprehensive product information and labelling, which allows users to access that information digitally. I think it's we've spoken a lot about manufacturers, but it's important to note that the general safety requirement will not just place duties on manufacturers, but also places obligations on other economic operators in the supply chain, such as importers and distributors. So, for example, they'll have to do things like look at the product information that accompanies a product and check that it's complete before it can be supplied. We've issued a detailed consultation alongside the white paper to seek views on the kind of nature and proportionality of the proposed obligations. So we're really keen to get your feedback. I think it's important to say we are doing this. We are going to implement the general safety requirement, but how we do that is what's the subject of consultation. So we're keen to get as many views as possible. Back to David.
Thank you. So moving on to the next chapter in the white paper. So this is about strengthening oversight of conformity assessment and certification. There's a reasonable amount on the slide here, and these will be shared separately, but the main thing to sort of highlight here is that the overall aim in this area is that we are seeking to ensure trust and transparency throughout the conformity assessment processes. And the right-hand side here is the sort of the key part, really, and this provides a very high-level summary of some of the issues that were found through the Grenfell Inquiry evidence, amongst other routes, and what our proposals are to address that we'll be taking forward as set out in the white paper. So all UK conformity assessment bodies will require a licence from the regulator in order to operate. That's seeking to address an issue whereby some conformity assessment bodies at the moment are not subject to any regulatory oversight, and we will ensure a level playing field for all cabs in that respect. Supplementing that, we think it's appropriate for conformity assessment bodies to have a statutory duty to act in the public good when undertaking their activities. That was something which came through the Morrell Day review. And also that CAB should be subject to a statutory code setting out requirements around sort of transparency and associated information. Again, there's more information in the white paper on that. We think there's a need for the regulator to have a greater role in working with and overseeing the role of the UK Accreditation Service, the national accreditation body. And we also are proposing a creation of an oversight board to monitor UCAS's performance and to further ensure it is accountable for its activities in relation to construction products. We also set out in the white paper a number of measures that seek to improve and increase transparency, both in relation to the activities of conformity assessment bodies and the UK Accreditation Service. And it's only one sentence here, but I know it's something which comes up and has come up quite often for a number of years about the lack of a group of UK conformity assessment bodies at present. So the government will be taking forward convening that group. Further detail on that will follow, but we recognise the benefits to government having a role in convening CABs. And then lastly, in terms of skills and competence, we want to ensure that CABs are incentivised and are able to invest in training and skills development, and similarly that UCAS is able to develop a talent pipeline to help ensure that the skills and competence are in place, not only today, but in years to come as well. Back to Katie.
Okay, so this is, I think, really quite an important slide. We've touched several times on the importance of product information in supporting the safe use of products. Whether products are covered by standards and therefore regulated under the CPR or covered by the GSR, we intend to introduce clear information requirements so that users are properly informed about the characteristics and performance of products, how they can be used, maintained and disposed of, and relevant safety evidence, amongst other things. We're going to standardise in regulations what product information needs to be made available, and we want to work with industry to standardise how that information is presented. It's important to say we consider product information to include marketing material. So this means that where we require that performance or safety claims need to be backed by evidence, that applies to marketing material too. Product information will need to be available digitally via labelling, for example, a QR code, which should support accessibility of information and support traceability. And we also need to continue to explore how digital product passports that are being introduced by the EU can support availability of product information in this country. We want greater transparency on test results, so third-party schemes will need to state what tests have been undertaken on products. Manufacturers will need to take reasonable steps to comply with requests for test information, and the national regulator will have powers to access all test information. And we want industry to move towards standardising how that test information is presented. We're going to give the national regulator powers to enforce all of these requirements through revised construction product regulation and through the general safety requirement regulations. And we will consider further if we need to do more in primary legislation to, for example, to more effectively enforce marketing. Finally, touching on the construction library, which was a recommendation from the Grenfell report, you may remember that in the Green Paper we set out quite a kind of bold vision of what a construction library could be, which was a sort of comprehensive product database. In response to the Green Paper, we heard that would be quite challenging in the short term, at least. I think there's lots of issues that we need to overcome before we can kind of deliver on that vision. I think it still remains something that we want to work towards. we all want sort of accurate, accessible product information. But I think what we're setting out in the white paper is that we're going to try and tackle that kind of huge problem and break it down into smaller chunks that we need to address. So, for example, making sure that the regulator has access to the right information it needs to effectively enforce, working out how we're going to support the transparency of test results through digital services, and how we make sure the industry itself can access the right guidance and information it needs to do its job effectively. We also recognise that there's a range of work going on in the digital space, both across government and industry, so we all need to work together to capitalise on that work and see how best government can kind of point everyone in the right direction. So we all know that regulation's all very well, but it's kind of meaningless unless it's backed by an effective enforcement regime. We've set out in previous slides a range of obligations that are going to be placed on economic operators, and they all need to be enforced. So the national regulator will take on new responsibilities, including the enforcement of the general safety requirement alongside the CPR, enforcing against misleading marketing in relation to safety and performance claims in any DOPAC, a greater role in oversight of standards and testing, for example, the licensing of conformity assessment bodies that David's just spoken about. We're also going to give the national regulator powers to recover costs for non-compliance in line with the sort of polluter pays principle. And clearly, this huge kind of uplift in its role will need additional funding to deliver this wider range of functions. One of the key changes in our reforms is around the role of local authority trading standards in the enforcement of construction product regulation. We heard in response to the Green Paper that trading standards at the local level quite often lack the kind of detailed expertise in the area. It's such a complex area of legislation, and they simply don't have the resources to do the job effectively. So we're going to make the national regulator the lead enforcement authority and remove the duty from local authority trading standards to enforce the regulations. We do recognise that they can play quite a valuable role at places like ports and borders, so trading standards will retain their powers, which gives them the flexibility to act if they want to and to continue that important work at the ports and borders, but takes the pressure off in terms of having a duty. It's really important that the regulator has access to the right information to do its job effectively. So one of the most important things is about making sure that we have clear reporting routes into the regulator to raise issues, and that regulators operating across the kind of building safety regime have the right systems in place to share intelligence and information effectively. And as David touched on in relation to Regulation 7, actually enforcement in the context of building control and looking at the sort of back end of the supply chain, so where products are installed and used, we need to consider the role of building control in enforcing those requirements. To ensure new duties on economic operators are enforceable, we'll define the sort of necessary offences so that we're really clear about what unacceptable behaviour is, and to enable regulators to secure compliance across the sector. Criminal offences will be punishable by fines with no upper limit and up to 2 years in imprisonment. We're also introducing new powers to issue civil monetary penalties. Finally, we're looking at the redress provisions in the Building Safety Act and intend to make improvements to make it easier to hold construction product manufacturers to account. Right. The final handover.
Your final couple of slides now. I'll just go through very quickly, just to highlight in terms of the consultation. As I mentioned, the two consultations both run for 12 weeks, closing on the 20th of May. So please do share thoughts through that on some or all of the questions. And alongside that, we'll be undertaking various sort of speaking events and engagement, such as today. And we're really keen to hear from a wide range of stakeholders through that. In terms of next steps, there's a chapter on, short but plenty of detail in a relevant chapter at the end of the white paper on kind of what happens next and implementation. We recognise that it's going to take a number of years. This is not an overnight transition. This is a year, multiple years transition, system-wide reform, and we recognise that it's essential that there is a smooth and orderly transition where we're giving appropriate notice to industry of what's coming and when. But just sort of very briefly, in terms of some of the things that you can expect to see next. So for those measures where we need to change the law, so where legislation is needed, there's sort of three elements to that. As Katie mentioned, we'll be bringing forward the general safety requirement regulations, and we're aiming to lay those in Parliament later this year, and then with an appropriate lead-in time for industry before it becomes mandatory. Secondly, we'll also be reforming the current construction products regime for all those products that are covered by designated standards, and we're looking to introduce that legislation towards the end of next year. And for some of the measures we've spoken about today, they will need an Act of Parliament. The two things I've just mentioned can be done through secondary legislation. For those measures where we need an Act of Parliament, that will be subject to parliamentary time, but we set out in the white paper some sort of broad timings around there and on this slide as well, but obviously we'll communicate more as and when we're able to on that. Thank you very much from both of us.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks, Katie. We might ask because we've gone a couple of minutes over, and it's probably right to do so with everything that David and Katie were trying to get across. So yeah, so if the speakers could go and do their best Westlife impression, that would be great. They are not taking requests. While people are thinking of questions, Paul, you were name checked quite a lot throughout those presentations. I don't know if we've got a microphone. Andrew's got one. I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, Paul, but I don't know if there is anything you wish to express or add to what's been said already.
Well, just briefly, I guess, a little journey. When I started the review with Annalisa, there were two ideas floating already in Whitehall. One was general safety requirement, and the other one was safety critical products as an idea. And I challenged both on the grounds that you can't really build policy around two things that you can't define. And got a bit stuck for a while, to be honest. And then you just think, well, you simply can't argue against the idea of products being safe. And I think the interesting idea that it sets as a principle, which I would still really preach very loudly to government, and I hardly speak to government, nor they to me, by the way, but I would still push this very strongly, that if we just established a regime in which government is very clear in legislation about what the duties of individual actors in the industry are, there's a huge amount of the load then can be carried by industry in terms of defining how you comply with that duty. And you should always allow a defence of reasonable skill and care, rather than just out to trap us all. And I would point to the compliance with the general safety requirement as a good example of, I've taken reasonable steps to comply because I followed this process. So actually, although it's voluntary, as Howell said, I think we're making law here. Because if you're ever challenged about a lack of reasonable steps, you would say, look, I followed this. And the two hopes that I would have for it, therefore, are that it drives people towards things like CCPI. I would upset Amanda by saying somebody else can invent a new code for product information if you want to, but why would you? It's not helpful to industry to have more than one. And all of these things will grow and develop as an understanding of what reasonable skill and care means without government telling us what safe means. Because I've said before, and apologies for this too, I've not met anybody in Whitehall who knows what safe means, and nor would I expect to. It's an industry issue. And then the other issue, just very quickly on safety critical products, is I'm glad to see the idea has been dropped, as a category. because it's clearly critical that what a product does is in its end use is what matters. But I'd hope the general safety requirement could actually be upped. We could start upping the game, again, by saying, okay, if the product may play a part in a safety critical element of construction, which are well defined in approved document B, there are additional things that we should do. And what those additional things to do should be, I think, probably part of PAS 2001. What the next steps are. But I mean, I'm just really pleased to see it. I congratulate all of you for getting it done. I've been unusually mature in standing back from the process of turning the idea into reality. But I think it's great to see it. And I think as a principle of how we might develop ideas around every aspect of what skill and care means in keeping people safe is a terrific starting point. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Paul. Sorry for putting you on the spot. So there is a microphone. The speakers are ready. There's some over on this side to start, and then we'll go around. Thank you. So if you could introduce yourself, that would be great.
Hello, Yarema Ronish. I'm a risk manager at the Wren Insurance. We do professional indemnity insurance for architects, and I was previously an architect. So a comment and a question. The comment is, it's really nice to see all of this coming together. But it's also very odd and disturbing to see that the general safety requirement would only apply to the non-CPR products. I find it odd. It creates a patchwork of regulation rather than a consistent approach. And then leading on to my question, all of the literature, because I've been starting to look through the literature that's been published on the 25th of February, the construction white paper and now the PAS, very studiously avoids mentioning the role of agrément certificates. Now, whether they're provided by the BBA or anybody else, there is a very important role for some kind of independent expert view on whether when a product is used in a particular scope of application, whether it meets particular building regulations requirements. I think there's a role for that. And it's odd that wasn't, there's no kind of pathway or anything mapped out in the white paper or the PAS, unless I missed something.
On the PAS, I think we do say that one way of demonstrating that you've met the principles of the PAS is through a technical approval process. We're not going to name agrément because other schemes are available, but the references to technical approvals would include BBA certificates where they're available. Yes,
but a technical approval, if I understand correctly, looks into to what extent the product conforms with a standard. But it wouldn't necessarily say to what extent the use of the product in a scope of application meets an approved document requirement, for example.
If you give me some contact details, can we follow this one up outside?
I'd love to. Yeah, that would be great.
It's an important question.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
And just to say, in terms of the white paper, I'm not sure if this is on, but hopefully you can hear me anyway. Agrément schemes would be one example that's of a third-party certification scheme. So the measures and the intent that we set out in relation to those would include that sort of scheme. But for similar reasons that Hal mentioned, we don't mention specific schemes like that.
Okay, so we are due to finish in 3 minutes, but I think we might try and stretch that, seeing as I'm sure there's a lot of questions. Go for it, Rupert.
Yeah, thank you. Rupert Scott, just representing the Fire Test Study Group, Trade Association of Test Laboratories. Just a subtle thing I'd picked up, a change between the draft and the final PAS 2000 was this move from the phrase essential requirements to key requirements. Essential requirements having a specific meaning in CE marking of products. Am I right in picking it up and sensing that the PAS wants to cover anything that might be critical, and that sometimes the essential requirements don't cover everything that we want covered?
I think the answer to that is yes and yes. We did not want to use the term essential requirements and have people think, oh, this is only for CE mark products. No, it's for everything. So that's why we changed the term. And I think there is a concern that the essential requirements do not necessarily cover everything necessary for safety. And it's quite fitting. I've got to go to a standards meeting in Berlin later this week. Interestingly, the Germans don't think that 44 of the harmonised standards adequately address safety. So I'm not alone in thinking that that might be a problem.
Thank you. I think, yep.
Thank you. Yeah, Chris Ridge from the Thermal Insulation Contractors Association. So it's great to hear that there's a route to compliance for products that do not have a harmonised standard. However, what I see in the market are products that are currently should be adopting this new route, but are currently testing or showing evidence of a declaration of performance to existing standards, to existing harmonised standards. Yet what they've actually done is they've effectively altered the product or hybridised products together. So what would be the message for the panel to manufacturers that have adopted that route? Thank you.
That sounds like one for me, I think. My message would be quite simply, comply with the law when a designated standard exists. And where a designated standard doesn't exist, follow the principles set out in this PAS and ensure that you can do everything you do to place a safe product on the market and to evidence that. And be aware that when a product is available to consumers, either in B&Q or elsewhere, then the general product safety requirements might well apply in those instances. And we'll have no hesitation in using those regulations to enforce the law in such circumstances, and indeed we do so on a regular basis.
If in doubt, ask the heat-soaked glass people.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello, my name's Chris Gaze. I only represent myself. Question about, I love the idea that we test everything, in God we trust, all others need data, that's good. But what I was wondering about is there's a big emphasis on oversight of test houses in the work that you're doing. What about when we see products which are tested in overseas test houses? How do we know that we can use that test data to give us the assurance that the product is safe?
So I think I'll start, but if anyone else wishes to come in, then feel free. I think the main point I would want to get across is that whoever is placing the product on the market, which the manufacturer or the economic operator as appropriate, has to ensure that the legal obligations are met. If they've used test data or a conformity assessment body that is outside of the UK, they need to be satisfied that the manufacturer is complying with the law, and that manufacturer needs to be able to provide the regulator, if asked, with any relevant information that the regulator sees fit to require to satisfy itself the product is meeting those legal requirements. So I think ultimately the responsibility is with the person placing the product on the market, and they have to be able to evidence that if they're challenged.
That's all true, but I'm sitting next to a high wire trapeze artist, because as most of you will realise, CE marking requires the participation of a notified body, and that is a European position. So CE marking is overseen by Europe. Now we need the High Wire Act here is that we've got to be very careful that we don't, especially if the general safety requirement is only for non-CE marked products, that we don't end up with a more onerous regime for the cabs overseeing general safety requirement than we have in Europe for CE marking. That will distort the level of the playing field, I fear. It is a challenge. But we've got to do all we can to make sure that we keep the field as level as we can. And for CE marking, UK government doesn't have a say in who the notified bodies are. So that is going to be a challenge. And I'm not telling Katie and David anything they don't already know. It's just going to take some navigating.
Thank you very much. Were there any more? Maybe this can be the last one, otherwise you're
Hi,
going to be late for lunch.
I'm Raju from WSP. Just quick one is there are Regulation 7, Construction Product Regulation, and the BSR has a safety critical product. How these differ in each other's scope and how we simply understand them, because there are same regulation or similar things controlling multiple aspects.
So I think clearly as we take this forward, there's an important role for guidance and information from the government and the regulator as appropriate in terms of what's required in what circumstances. I think I'd probably answer that in terms of consideration of the slightly separate stages, as in there'll be requirements for leading up to and placing the product on the market, which will be one of the two routes I mentioned in the presentation and that's set out in the white paper around a designated standard or the general safety requirement. Then sort of moving through the journey of the product, there will be rules in place for specifiers and installers and the like around the selection and installation of those products. As I mentioned, but it's worth repeating, we're very conscious that a number of measures have come in recent years, such as those in Part 2A that Hal mentioned. So we're very cognizant of the need to ensure that anything extra we do introduce is, genuinely adds value, addresses a gap, and doesn't give rise to the risk of sort of duplicating requirements or confusion. So I think I'd say we're aware of that, making sure the landscape is coherent, and it's something we'll be looking at in more detail as we go forward.
Can I just come in on that as well? Because I think one of the things that sort of relates to that is one of the findings of the Grenfell Inquiry around the fragmentation of regulation. So they're kind of one of their key recommendations was around the creation of a single construction regulator. We've got a prospectus out at the moment which sets out some principles for how that might work, but I think actually that presents a real opportunity in how we bring all of this kind of regulation together so that you've got proper oversight of the system as a whole, rather than kind of tackling it in chunks. So I think, yeah, that creates the opportunity to not just regulate more effectively, but to also bring together the kind of guidance and information for the sector so that it's more accessible, understandable, and there's a kind of greater understanding of how it all fits together.
We are expecting some guidance in future. To clarify, I just meant very simply, construction manufacturers Regulation 7 is more specifying store maintain and reporting. Is it that way? Is the right way of approaching?
Yeah, and it's worth having a look at the white paper itself, because what we've tried to do is set out the responsibilities of each kind of party, from the manufacturer through to the testing, through to the sort of designers and installers and contractors, and set out the relevant kind of responsibilities at each stage, and also kind of the relevant sort of regulations that apply at each stage. We've got some diagrams that should hopefully help.
I think it's also worth saying there are clues in the names. The building regulations are about buildings. The construction product regulations are about construction products. Construction products don't comply with building regulations. They're put into buildings and the building complies. And I think we need to keep that distinction clear when we're trying to apply the regs.
Okay, so thank you so much to the panel and for all of your questions there. Much appreciated. I won't keep you too much longer. We'll unlock the doors in a minute. But just to add a few more events, the BSI just on our side, some takeaways for you in case any of these are also of interest to you. BS 8214, there's a webinar in April, Eurocodes in May. You can go to our page. We'll hopefully include all these links in a pack that people, yes, we'll click on these afterwards, or you can see an email address there if you wish to get in touch. There's been a lot of talk today about workmanship, competence, skills, putting products in the wrong way around. Funnily enough, BSI launched its Built Environment Competence Hub in January, just drawing your attention to that. So in collaboration with the Industry Competence Steering Group, the Industry Competence Committee, the Building Safety Regulator, all of the competence frameworks that those entities have produced are all there. BSI standards are accessible there as well. And that will grow more as the need for that type of information grows. So please do go and log into the Competence Hub if you haven't done so already, including people that are on the panel. And BSI membership, we touched on my colleagues at the back of the room who are here to support you if you wish to know more about BSI membership, including some of the benefits such as saving 50% on standards and access to standard support as well. So please don't forget that that is there. If you wish to get involved in standards development itself, I encourage you to do so. Very rewarding to be part of our committees and develop these standards. We talk about 444 designated standards just for construction products. We need your help in making sure that they're fit for purpose, of course, and say what good looks like in your field. I hope you do know what good looks like after today. There's another QR code there if you wish to click on it. And thank you for attending the launch event. We encourage you to go and seek out PAS 2000 if you haven't already. Hal talked about getting feedback on products, and I think BSI would also echo that PAS 2000 is our product. And as you use it more and learn more about how it could benefit you, please do tell us your experiences of using it so that we can make sure that as we develop it further, it grows into something even bigger than it is already. So thank you so much. Lovely to see you all. Go and enjoy the sun, and we hope to see you again soon.